Hello, welcome to Have Your Say. I'm Robin Lustig. Today you can have your say about bird flu. Is the world ready for what could be a global pandemic if the virus changes so that it can spread between humans? The experts say it could happen, and if it does, in theory, millions of people could die. But how real is the risk? Do you think that governments are doing enough, not enough, or too much to prepare for a world health crisis? This is your chance to have your say. We have two guests on the programme today. Here with me in the studio is Pat Thomas, who is the health editor of The Ecologist magazine, and we're joined from Rome by Samuel Jutzi of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. Thank you both very much for joining us on the programme. We have had thousands of questions for you both. Pat, I want to start with you. A very basic question from Sophia, who emailed us from Epping here in England. She asked, what are the symptoms of bird flu? Are they any different from normal flu symptoms?
Initially, no. In fact, when you come down with an H5N1 infection, you tend to have a very high fever, aches and pains, that sort of thing. But there are some very big differences. First of all, there's a longer lead time when you're infected. If you're infected with a normal flu virus, it's 2 or 3 days and then you start to get sick. It can be 2 days, up to 8 days, even up to 17 days after you're exposed before you come down with an H5N1 flu-type symptom. The other thing is, after about 5 days of being infected with H5N1, you start to deteriorate more rapidly, whereas most of us would get better with a regular flu. You start to experience chest pains in particular, which suggests that the virus is lodging itself much more deeply in the lungs, which is what this virus does. And very quickly it can disintegrate into a pneumonia-like situation, and that's why
Thomas, what view do you take in general of the way in which governments have reacted to this virus?
One of my main concerns is that the government has reacted in a very narrow fashion. We're focusing very much on developing drugs, developing antivirals, and looking for vaccines and that sort of thing. And all of this sort of biosecurity about killing birds and keeping them confined and what have you misses the point that you cannot control a virus once it starts. They spread very rapidly, they spread very easily. And simply being infected, for instance, simply carrying a virus does not necessarily mean that you will come down with the flu itself. And so you have to be looking more at the host health. How healthy are the people who are dying from H5N1 at the moment? We don't know that because no funding is being put into that. What is the epidemiology of the disease? Samuel and I probably take a different view in this, that I believe that the commercial farming of poultry is actually very important, because when you have sometimes millions of birds in some of these Asian poultry farms shoved together, you're creating a situation where the virus can very easily mutate and spread towards a more virulent strain. And to say that we have culled hundreds of millions of birds simply because of a backyard infection is simply not right. No, of course he shouldn't be cancelling his holiday unless he's planning on playing with bird feces while he's on holiday, because that's how people are catching this virus at the moment. It's children playing with dead birds, it's people who are in contact with birds' organs, it's people in contact with bird feces. And so there seems no reason why anybody shouldn't go to Turkey. Although I would say, sometimes when we're on holiday, our health tends to suffer. We eat badly, we drink too much. These are the risk factors that may make you more prone to illness.
One question about bird flu that no one has really covered for me so far, which is why it's turned up now. Where has it been all these years between this latest outbreak and previous ones? Why is it so prevalent now? If anyone has any answers to this, I'd be interested to know. Pat, any thoughts?
I do have some thoughts, and in fact the World Health Organization has good data on this to show that H5N1 first emerged in 1959 in chickens in Scotland. Again in 1991 in English turkeys. So this is a very old virus, and it's also been, although we're concentrating on Asia, it's also been in Mexico as well, with disastrous results. In fact, the way that they treated it was to vaccinate their birds, and what they now have is a kind of silent epidemic of H5N1 circulating in very low numbers there.
So it comes up and then it falls away again, it lies dormant, and then it reappears somewhere else?
As all viruses do.
First of all, local markets. In Hong Kong, they've shut down the markets where they sell live birds. In Turkey, we've got somebody who's worried about going to markets. Is that a problem area?
I don't know of any cases of bird flu that have actually been caused by people walking through markets and touching birds. And in a way, it's a much better system. For instance, when we walk into a supermarket here in the UK, we don't know where our chicken has come from. If you're walking in a market in Turkey or in Hong Kong, you at least have some idea where the bird has come from. The second thing is about lifestyles and what have you. A vegetarian lifestyle may prevent you from getting it. It certainly doesn't spread from human to human at the moment. But of course, another option is to look at the organic option, to look at birds that are reared in a free-range way, to look at birds that are organic and are probably probably less likely to be in flux.
This email, though, from Stephanie in Phoenix, Arizona. Bird flu couldn't have jumped from Eastern Asia to Eastern Europe. Many other countries must be affected on the migration path, both before and after Turkey. Either that other countries are behind in health services and can't find out, or they are keeping it a secret. What do you think it is?
Okay, well, several things. We've already covered the fact that in fact the bird flu has made a quite nice an arc from Asia into Turkey, and that's a logical arc. Lots of countries in between have been affected by it. There may be other countries that are affected by it. Reporting isn't always good in these countries for various reasons. Either the infrastructure isn't there to look for the virus, or governments are worried about tourism, or what have you. So I think it's a mixture of one thing or another. I won't be a cynic and just say they're hiding it from us. So I think the problem is that we're looking at it from a medical point of view when we ought to be involving meteorologists and ornithologists and people from all sorts of specialities.
But of course what people are most worried about is, am I going to catch it? Is my family at risk? And that's really this whole question that Al just raised about what governments are doing to try to minimize the risk of the virus spreading from poultry to humans.
Absolutely, but let's put this into perspective. This is a planet with 65 billion people on it. About 60% of those live in Asia. 160 of them have been known to have been affected with H5N1 seriously. 80 have died. This is a very small thing, although potentially, should the virus mutate, it could be a big thing. Equally, it may not be H5N1 that causes the next pandemic. We may be focusing all our attention on this particular avian influenza, and another virus may sneak up behind us and be the problem.
And just to be clear, this great fear that people have that at some point the virus will change into one that can be transmitted from one human being to another human being, as far as we know, that has not happened.
As far as we know, it has not happened. There is a suspected transmission between mother and daughter. It's never been confirmed, and if it has spread from human to human, it never goes past one spread, if you like. The other thing is that we're focusing too much on the idea that a mutation is just around the corner, as if it's just one tweak of the genome away, when in fact a lot of things have to be in place for the virus to mutate into a human form.
A number of people do refer back to that 1918 global flu pandemic, when tens of millions of people, it is thought, died, and there are fears that potentially, in theory, the world could be facing something similar. Are there resemblances?
There are resemblances. It was a pandemic. This one, of course, isn't a pandemic yet. This is a potential possible pandemic. But it'd be interesting to look more closely at the 1918 epidemic for a while, because we assume that tens of millions died. The figure goes from 20 million to 100 million people. It's an absurd margin of error. In fact, we don't know how many people died in 1918. We assume that it was an egalitarian disease. It wasn't. It did hit people who were undernourished and poverty-stricken much more than it did healthy people. I think fully 15 million people in rural poverty-stricken India died in the 1918 pandemic rather. And the other thing is that we assume that all things are equal, that everything that happened then is happening now. It wasn't. We were in the middle of World War at the time. The so-called healthy people who were dying were soldiers crammed into transport ships and hospitals and what have you. So in a way, that is a parallel here. The people who are unhealthy are being affected. They were being affected then too. And this goes back to trying to look at the health of the host. If you get infected with the virus, you aren't necessarily going to get ill. You aren't necessarily going to die. It depends on whether that virus overwhelms your defenses. And so when we're talking about countries like Africa, for instance, this is a very good case in point about why the government should be feeding people rather than directing funds to...
All right, stop there, because I want to see what Pat makes of this. Pat, what do you make of all that?
I'm baffled. I'm completely baffled. But also, perhaps it makes sense, because when we read about avian influenza in the news, it really is using the language of war. We're talking about annihilation. We're talking about the enemy. We're talking about destroying the virus. And so it does wind people up into a warlike state. But you can't wage war on a virus. Viruses are ancient. They are adaptable. They will change. The more you throw at them, the stronger they get.
They also kill people.
Well, they do also kill people. But let's put this into perspective. The last two pandemics killed 1 million and 2 million people globally, respectively. So the idea of 175 million suddenly dropping dead from avian flu, from a virus that has not yet mutated into a human form, it seems ridiculous at the moment.
Because I think we need to establish this. Is this a virus? Might it be a virus which is airborne? In other words, you can contract it simply by breathing it in from somewhere you don't know the origin.
Viruses can be airborne. The interesting thing about H5N1 is when it affects people, it lodges very deeply in lung tissue. It doesn't produce the coughing and sneezing that would transfer the virus from one human to the other. So that's actually good news. And also viruses that are airborne, viruses that land on your 10p coin or on the tube or whatever, they don't last very long. They live maybe anywhere from 2 hours to 48 hours outside the body. They need a host. Viruses love hosts. That's why the issue of migratory birds has come up. It does live, the virus apparently does live, according to new WHO data, in feces for quite a long time. So in the winter months it may survive in feces for up to a month. In the summer it may last as much as a week. So again, the issue comes down to hygiene. Wash your hands. And that's why children are so affected, because children are forever sticking their hands in their mouth without washing them.
Okay, lot more calls, lot more emails. First, a quick reminder, this is Have Your Say. We are live on BBC television and radio. Remember, you can watch the programme at any time on our website. That's at bbcnews.com/haveyoursay. We are talking about bird flu. Our guests are Samuel Jutzi from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, here in the studio with me, Pat Thomas from the Ecologist magazine. If you still want to have your say, here's a figure. Just here in the UK, if one looks at the number of people who die of, if I can call it, ordinary flu every year, it's something like 20,000 people. So far, globally, 80 people have died of bird flu. Are we getting out of proportion?
Yes, it is out of proportion, and although Andy mentions things like Ebola and malaria and what have you, bird flu, not to sound disrespectful, is the sexy new disease. You know, it's captured the media's attention because we don't know how it's going to evolve or when it's going to evolve. There's a mystery to it. It's a great scare story.
But when you hear scientists say up to 100 million people could die, it's hardly surprising that people get worried.
But often those comments, and I've been on panels with several of these scientists, so I know what they're saying privately. Often these comments are being taken out of context. They're being asked by someone in the media, well, you know, what's the worst case scenario? And they give the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is quoted in the press. But in fact, we have no idea what's going to happen with this virus. It may peter out altogether. It may cause a pandemic. Something else may cause the pandemic. And we have to have a sense of proportion as human beings about what we can do to protect ourselves, how we can keep ourselves healthy. And it's not about stocking up on tin food. It's about making sure our immune systems are
I think you were saying something rather similar.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that that's true. I mean, viruses are programmed to survive. Therefore, they mutate to survive. So I don't know whether, perhaps Samuel could answer this better. But flu viruses in particular don't hang around for a long time. We never fully isolated the 1918 virus, so we don't actually know what caused that. But perhaps Samuel could say something.
Just to make sure I've understood this right, if a virus mutates, then the vaccine which has been prepared for the virus in its existing state might not work once it changes.
That's right. And that's a very important point that people need to get under their skin, really, is that you can only make a vaccine to a specific virus. Once it changes, you have to make a new virus. That's why every year the World Health Organization sits down and picks 3 viruses that they think are going to be circulating during flu season, and they turn that into the flu vaccine. The problem is that we know now from medical research that the flu vaccine isn't actually protecting people because there are hundreds of viruses circulating, and there is no guarantee that you will get that particular version.
Okay, Rick Dean on the line.
Interesting fact that hasn't been put in the press, because there have been blood tests on people who've been infected with H5N1, and on the general population as well. And approximately 38% of people are already immune to H5N1. So that means that that's people sampled. So that means that there has been mild infection, there has been asymptomatic infection. So this shows that the reporting of the incidence of the disease is probably not right.
So some of us may already be immune.
Absolutely, and I think it's very important to understand that although we talk about it in terms of being a killer disease, there is mild disease. Japan has mild disease at the moment.
That's very interesting indeed. There is a lot more to be said about this, but I'm afraid is all we have got time for. So, my thanks to our guests, Samuel Jutzi from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, Pat Thomas from the Ecologist magazine here in London. If you still have something that you would like to say about bird flu, the debate will continue on our website at bbcnews.com/haveyoursay. For now, though, from me and from everyone on the team, thank you for watching, thank you for listening. From Have Your Say, goodbye.